I don't claim to be the world's greatest angler, but what I have got is perseverance. Even when the chips are down, even if I'm not feeling it, I still come every week. And I think that is a big part of carp fishing, is just that never give up attitude. Eventually, things will fall in your favour. They can't not, whether it's by accident or by design, they will fall in your favour if you just never give up. Longreach first came on my radar while I was fishing another lake on the St Ives complex. I was fishing the shallow pit for Colin. She was still about at the time. And I'd always known about Longreach, and it had a reputation of being a bit of a ball buster. It was sort of the hardest lake on the complex, which sort of attracted me to it, as well. But what really sort of set it in stone was during my time on the shallow pit, a geezer called Joe Morgan, he caught the fully, and the Longreach Fully hadn't been caught for about 5 years at the time. So, when a fish goes that length of time without getting caught, you almost sort of don't consider it's about anymore. But I remember the buzz that went around the complex, like, Joe had the fully, and it sort of lit the whole complex up. And then sort of in social media a few weeks later, I saw photos of Joe holding the fully up, and I just knew from that second that I needed that carp. It was just the most perfect fish. It was an incredible carp. To go along with that as well, there was 2 other big mirrors in Longreach. You had Starburst, which at the time I think had done mid-40s, and a really nice mirror called Muttley's, which I think again had done sort of low 40s. At the time, I didn't really know how many fish were in Longreach, but I knew it was a reasonably demanding pit. One whole bank of it is all out of bounds. The boats are on there, through the warmer weather, from first thing in the morning till last thing at night. A lot of the days you didn't have rods in the water, and the bar system in the lake. If you ever look at it on Google Earth, it's just got a real sort of complex bar system, which came down from 15 foot of water to 3 foot on the top. So sort of cut-offs were commonplace. And just the whole overgrown nature and everything about the venue was demanding, but I suppose in a way that sort of made it even more appealing. I knew for sure I was going to have to go back to catch that fully. Later that year I did eventually catch Colin, but I decided not to go straight onto Longreach. I'd fancied coming to Reading and having a go for a fish called the baby black. It was a fish that it was one of those fish that I'd seen photos of and really wanted to have a go for, and then sort of every time you clicked on social media you'd see another photo of it, and it was it was an itch that needed to be scratched straight away. So I decided that I'd go back to Longreach in the future, but for now I was going to go to Reading and have a go for the baby black. Englefield was not wanting to gloss over the campaign, but it was an odd one for me. I never felt like I really got to grips with the lake. I started quite late in November. The lake was sort of reasonably quiet, and just dotting around, sort of learning the lake. The idea was to learn the lake, for the following year, to get stuck in the spring. And I did manage sort of one loss, which I won't dwell on, and a couple of captures it was a few weeks before Christmas, I believe, in December. Yes, I was raring to go coming back the next year, but again, it's making no excuses. The lake was extremely busy, and I couldn't seem to get on fish. But it all came good in August, sort of like a series of events. I'd seen the fish showing for 2 weeks before in a certain area. Those conditions came back in, and I had my chance, and luckily it all played out, and I got my result, and the baby black was mine. Quite a surreal capture, really, because when I'd had a campaign where I didn't feel like I was consistent, but all of a sudden you know, I'd got the result, I'd caught the one that I came for. So it was, you know, it's just one of those, sometimes in campaigns, you know you're on the right track, you're catching the other fish, you're leading up to that big moment. But it wasn't like that for me on Englefield. It sort of all of a sudden came one morning, and then I was just left, Christ, you know, and then your mind's just going at 100 miles an hour. I remember the drive home, it's a reasonable way, it's like 150 miles for me to come from Norfolk to Reading, so it's a reasonable drive home. And the drives always give you time to reflect on, you know, whether it's the start of the trip and you're thinking what you need to do that trip, or whether it's the end of the trip and you're sort of thinking, you know, where you went wrong. Well, you know, this particular time it was me thinking what to do next. And really Longreach was the only place on my mind. I didn't, you know, sooner than I expected. You know, you think after a long, hard campaign like that, you'd sort of take your foot off the gas a little bit, you know, maybe have socials with a few mates, but, you know, the reality of targeting these big carp is it is sort of like a drug, and you know, once you've had one fix, it's just straight on to the next one. So on the way home, I knew that it was, you know, I was Longreach bound, and you know, try my best to try to get that big old fully in the bag. I remember my first few trips on Longreach. It was my first trip down was a bank holiday weekend, and I generally start my trips on a Sunday. So with it being bank holiday, I thought there'd probably still be the odd person still about, you know, who were able to fish a Sunday night that they normally couldn't. And I had walked around the lake a couple of times previous when I'd fished the shallow pit. But, you know, obviously it's different when you turn up for your first trip actually to fish that lake. And I've pulled up in the car park, and there was 3 or 4 cars, but the Longreach car park sort of is shared with, they park, if they're fishing the top end of Meadow, they'll park in that same car park. And done a lap of Longreach. Boats were out, you know, in full force. With it being bank holiday, it was always really busy with the water skiers on the bank holidays. And there was one other person fishing. It's a young lad called Liam, and I couldn't believe it. And I remember sitting and chatting to Liam, and yeah, he said it had been quiet, you know, not many people giving it a go, which for me was ludicrous. It was such a difference to Englefield. You know, in the spring on Englefield, I was turning up and the lake was just full. On a Sunday, they just rammed. And to turn up at Longreach and it be quiet, it was crazy. It was like a breath of fresh air. So I'd done a few laps, you know, sort of familiarised myself with bits and pieces. Like Longreach is basically 35, 40 acres, but sort of like a rectangle shape. The main sort of fishing bank has swims all the way along it, and then there's a few swims on each side, the office bank and the field bank. The whole other bank where the line of buoys are was all out of bounds. I decided to sort of go in a central area, waited till the boats went in. That was my first sort of experience of the boats. You know, it was just before dark they went in, but you know, it's a common occurrence on there. And I remember just got my rods out just before dark, and I made myself a cup of tea, and I walked down a couple of swims to I set up in a swim called the Doubles, which is sort of middle of the lake. I walked down to the swim to the left, a swim called Mutley's, and it sort of looked over sort of a ramp out sort of closer to our fishing bank, a ramp and 4 buoys. I've sat there, there was an old boat turned upside down, and I sat on the boat having a cup of tea, and I've sort of like, I've seen something out the corner of my eye, and I thought, sure, that was a carp show. But you know, it's sort of, it was my first night on the lake, and I knew another thing to add about the lake is, you know, a lot of big bream, you know, and where sometimes when them big bream show, you know, you can sort of get mistaken to thinking it's a carp. So I didn't really think a lot of it. So a few bream through the night, through the course of the 2 nights, which is a common occurrence. And one of the problems with Longreach in those sort of middle swims is the lake's reasonably sort of grown up, so you only get sort of vision straight out in front of you, a little bit left, a little bit right. You didn't, from them a lot of those swims on the main bank, you couldn't actually watch all of the water. So I'd had a few bream through the night. I had one more night of the trip left, and I was up at first light. So I decided to crank the rods in and do a bit of a lap. You know, sometimes you had to sort of get on one of the end banks to actually get a proper view down the lake. So I've gone out onto the office bank, went in the first swim there, they call it the Green Gate. I'm sort of looking down the lake, and I've seen that same, I said to you a minute ago, on my first night I saw something show, possibly could have been a carp, near that jump in front of a swim called the Pipes. That's what commanded that water. When I got round to the green fence, I saw it again, saw it go over, like 100% was a carp, you know. It was obviously a carp that I'd seen that first night, but you know, first night on the water, you sort of, you know, not doubt yourself, but you almost, it's all fresh, you know. I weren't going to go moving straight away then, but so for that last night, I decided to go in that Pipes. Again, leaded it up sort of in between the boats going in and out. Sort of there was the series of bars, and then there was a very shallow bar, and then it dropped off the back of that bar, and about sort of 15 yards behind that is where the first sort of buoys were. So I sort of went as close as I could get, but still fish safe, just over the bar, sort of in the deeper water, and didn't see any fish through the night. You know, had a few liners and bits and pieces, but you could, I mean, those big old bream moving about, I mean, you know, there was loads of them that were double figures, so they can give you the same sort of liners as you get from carp. But the following morning, just after first light, I think I'd had 2 or 3 bream through the night. It's worth mentioning as well, the swims there were, because of the constant wash of the boats, you know, all the bank was sort of eroded. They were almost slides down to the water, and you had to have your rods out in the water on a lot of the swims. So it was never an easy job getting from, you know, your bivvy at the top. You had to get into your waders down the slope and out. Well, that first morning, yeah, it was sort of just half an hour after first light, middle rod has just blitzed off. I've ran down there, it was just steaming, picked up into it. I knew it was a carp straight away, and I remember that that took me off sort of to the left, just stripped a load of line off me and then swung back right. And I thought, Christ, it was getting close to that sort of nearest buoy to me, and it did make it round the buoy. I remember bending into it and I saw the buoy sort of bobbing up and down. And an old trick that sometimes works is just to undo the bail arm, let the slack out of the line, and hope the fish swims back round it. So I've done that, line came off, and snapped it back, and sure enough the fish had come off the side of it. And that was my first Longreach carp, and I think it's a £30 common, sort of a lowish £30 common, but a lovely fish, quite a stocky sort of deep one. I'd just done the photos of that, and I hadn't got the other rod, hadn't put that rod back out, but the other rod that I'd sort of placed a bit further along that gully, and that's gone as well. And that was I think it was a mid-double stocky. That was my first trip to fish, and really that, you know, that's where it started. I had a really good run of fish those first few trips. I baited that area before I left, and the following week came back and managed to catch starburst, which was the biggest fish in the lake. I think it was 44 something, I think, a little bit down off its sort of top weights, but you know, it was sort of after spawning and what have you. But yeah, second trip, and I'd had the biggest mirror in the lake, which was crazy. And I think I did catch another one out of that pipe swim on the following trip, again another stocky. And to be honest with you, after that the swim sort of died a bit of a death for me. It was a common occurrence during my fishing on Longreach that, I mean, that catching those fish over a period of 3 weeks was the longest run in any one swim that I could catch fish. It was very much, the fish in there were very, very nomadic, and I could never seem to bait an area and actually get anything going that way. But you know, at the time, I didn't know that, and I knew that fully had been caught out of the pipes before. And bear in mind, I'd just caught the biggest mirror in the lake from the pipes. You know, for me, it was the thing to do was to carry on baiting the pipes, which I did for the next sort of 4, 5, 6 weeks. And the lake was quiet. There was only me and a young lad called Liam fishing it, and he was doing his thing in the Mutley's swim, and I was doing my thing in pipes. It was a glorious bit of fishing, you know, something I hadn't experienced for a good few years. Even though I was baiting an area, but having the freedom to move if I wanted to. I suppose as we got into autumn and more of the rough weather came, I sort of started to lose hope with the pipes. Really, you know, the amount of bait I'd put in, and it just wasn't happening for me. We were sort of into October now, and the fish seemed to be spending more and more time out on the buoy line. I've never been able to work out why they spent so much time over on that buoy line. I mean, the lake wasn't busy. You know, there was 2 of us fishing it regular. You know, normally on a water, the pressure of anglers would push fish into areas where they couldn't be angled. And remember, you had sort of the buoys. There was sort of like the line of buoys, and they're all connected with chains. And I can imagine it was just, you know, it was a nice area for them to be. I just almost think it was almost like their home. It's where they like to be. Because why else would they be there all the time? You know, I didn't feel it was angling pressure pushing them over there. But anyway, it was an area they spent a lot of time, and they seemed to be sort of spending more and more time over there. Sort of around that time, I'd sort of hatched a bit of a plan. Sort of as you got further down the lake, it did sort of narrow up slightly, and sort of the end of the buoys was sort of right of a swim that I used to call the hole. And I'd done the distance pinner and worked out that if I'm not the world's greatest range angler, but worked out if I could fish, you know, 140, you know, 145, I would be within 20 yards of this buoy line. The week before, I remember it was worth noting as well that sort of a southwesterly sort of blew into, it's another pain in the arse thing with the lake. All the good winds would blow into that out of bounds bank. So you'd get the big southwesterlies and they'd be blowing straight into that out of bounds bank. But that did also help you with the casting because you had the wind on your back. Well, I'd been seeing these fish sort of further down the buoy line. I turned up on a Sunday morning, and this week I'd decided I was gonna, you know, I weren't gonna carry on with the pipes. The fish was, you know, they're spending far too much time out on them buoys, so I decided to give it a crack in the hole there. Probably not the neatest fishing I've ever done, but I got the bait out there and got the rods spread out there. Again, had a really good trip. Can I remember the exact order they came in? I think it was the Monday morning. I'd heard fish showing on the buoy line through the night. The Monday morning, Liam had turned up early, and he'd come walking round. We'd had a cup of tea. A few fish were showing on the buoy line, like just behind my baits. It was looking cock on. It was probably, I think it was about 10 o'clock. The shows had sort of died down, and again the middle rod, I had the bobbins clipped up tight, you know, real tight, and I've just heard the clip just snap, and it's just melted. Sort of got in my waders, got down into the water, and you know when you lift into a big one, it just felt like I was just lifting into a breeze block out there. It didn't take a load of line, but it just sort of came in sort of slow on a bit of a zigzag. It would go left, it would go right, plodding about, you know, typical big fish sort of bite. And I always tried on Longreach to play the fish from up on the high bank until I made sure that I'd got them over that first bar. You're sort of safe. Once you're over that first bar, you know, you could get down in the water, get ready to land it. So I was down in the water, and I remember it rolled over, and I've seen this big dark mirror, and I thought, oh Christ, that's not starburst again, is it? And it sort of slipped in the net, and it was Mutley's. And what was incredible, you know, it looks huge. I think it was mid 40, 45 or 46. I can't remember exactly, but up until now I'd only ever heard of Mutley sort of scraping 40 pound, but it turns out that, you know, it done similar weights to that before, but you know, everyone sort of kept bits and pieces quiet on there, you know, to sort of keep the lake quiet. So yeah, that was Mutley's, sort of the second of the 3 big mirrors. The following morning I had two bites again, and that was an upper 30 common that they call couchies, and a little dumpy fully scaled with a little flat lobe on his tail. He's quite a friendly little fella and sort of a known associate with the big uns, you know. It was a surreal morning really. I think I'd blanked for sort of a good, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 weeks after those captures in the pipes. But you know, that sort of, you know, cemented to me that, you know, maybe the sort of the baiting style wasn't the best on there. You know, I felt confident of more fish through that autumn, but as it turned out, those 3 fish were the last fish caught from that lake until the following spring. I think I carried on up until right up until Christmas that year, but the lake just seemed to die a death. You know, it's a mean old place to fish in the winter. Everything has to be done. All your casting out all has to be done in waders. Obviously sliding down muddy banks. It was yeah, and the cold winds would always blow into that fishing bank. So she was a mean old girl in the winter, but yeah, nothing more. I sort of pulled off Christmas, and that was me done for that first sort of autumn. The next season, the next year couldn't come round quick enough. I think I started back middle of February. I never normally start back on my main water that early. I normally leave it till sort of latter part of March, but with the results I'd had the autumn before, I was absolutely gagging to get back at it. I just didn't want to miss a thing. I wanted to be there to see that first show and see the lake wake up. Yeah, I couldn't wait to get back, and absolutely so full of confidence. You know, after having the other 2 so quickly, you know, I just convinced myself that I was having that fully that spring. You know, but it didn't pan out like that. It really didn't. The lake had sort of started to get slightly busier, you know, as lakes generally are in the spring. I think word was slowly sort of getting out about those Longreach fish. They'd been kept off the radar for so long, but you know, slowly sort of photos get out and people sort of get interested, and rightly so. Those 3 mirrors are just, you know, top drawer. So yeah, that season really didn't pan out for me how I thought it would. That spring I only managed 1 bite. It was a really, really tough spring. Like, everyone was struggling. It just seemed, you know, typical spring fishing. You find the fish, they're waking up, they're showing, you know, cast bright ones at them. It just wasn't like that. You know, the only shows I'd see would be on the buoys. I spent the first sort of section that spring fishing out long from that whole swim. It was my best shot at access to that buoy line. But the fish didn't, they seemed to be sort of further down the lake on the buoys where you really couldn't reach them. I did manage a small one. It was actually that same dumpy little fully scaled that I caught with Mutley's. I caught that on a big wind off the office bank, and really that was about it for the spring. I had carried on bait in the pipes. I still felt it was a good area for the fully. You know, it's worth mentioning that the fully got caught. I started on the lake in the autumn the year before, and the fully got caught the spring before. So, you know, during my time on the lake, the fully hadn't made another appearance. I sort of started to find a little bit more consistency through the summer after the fish spawned. The weed sort of got up, and there was a big band of weed on the first bar down the fishing bank, and the fish sort of seemed to like to spend a lot of time in that. A lot of the time they were, you know, not interested in feeding. I'd try to fish from them, you know, but couldn't get bites. But you know, the funny thing was, I remember I think it was the fish spawned, and we all gave them a couple of weeks just to, you know, do their thing and recover as such. And during that time, I'd done a few nights on another lake on the complex lagoon, and I did actually catch a couple of carp, which was nice. You know, made me remember I can do it. But obviously still being on the complex, I could still keep an eye on Longreach, and I carried on baiting the pipes. And I did manage a few fish out of the pipe sort of over the sort of 5-6 weeks after they'd spawned, but funnily enough, no bites from the area that I was baiting. It was almost, you know, all I'd done was just condition the bream. I was just getting hammered by the bream every night I fished that area, and the 3 carp I caught, I think I caught a couple of 20-pound commons and a 30-pound common. They were all from areas that I hadn't been baiting, which, you know, again sort of told me about sort of the nature of the pit. Like I say, they were very nomadic. I mean, I don't know exact numbers of fish in there, but I would certainly say, you know, somewhere between 30 and 40. You know, it was sort of the same faces we'd see, and sort of probably half a dozen of them were sort of stockies, sort of, you know, low 20 sort of scaly stockies. And that really, that full year, that full season as such, that's what made up the bulk of the captures. Yeah, I had a very good opportunity. I think it was September. I'd done a night in the pipes, moved up the lake a couple of swims, and done a night in the doubles, sort of middle of the lake. And early hours that morning, I'd heard fish showing to the right of me again, in front of the swim I caught muttleys and then from the hole. They were a reasonable way out, but I couldn't really tell exactly where they were. But the next day I moved into that swim, put rods out reasonably long, sort of roughly where I thought the fish were showing. But that following morning, they put a bit of a display on in front of me, and they were further out than where I was. On a certain line, they were showing further out than where I was fishing. And there was a couple of good mirrors showing out there. I mean, in hindsight, I don't think it was the Fully. I'm pretty sure it was muttleys and another one of the better mirrors, sort of 30-pound mirrors showing out there. But I remember the session well, because I ended up losing the fish the following week, and it was quite a painful loss. You know, after sort of most of what I'd caught up until then that season was sort of like the smaller sort of fish. I think I had one 30-pound common. But I remember that morning after the fish stopped showing, I waited for them to get their showing out the way, and I thought, I was going home that day, but I thought I'll lead the area up and put a bit of bait in ready for the next week. So I sent a lead out long, and sort of the further you go out there, it's sort of, you've got the bars, but it almost shallows up a bit as well, so that the lead's landed a long way out on the shallow water, sort of where I had the bites the following autumn. I've just started tweaking the lead back, and the lead's like it's fell off a cliff. It's just come off the top of one of the bars, and it's just felt it all the way down again deep. Crack, it's gone at the bottom and just pulled back over like a billiard board. Put that in the clip, wound the rig back in and sent the rig back out, and it was like it was on GPS. That lead just smacked down exactly where I'd seen the shows that morning, you know, 100% spot on. So I baited that area, came back the following week. First night fishing that zone quiet, second night about midnight, started getting a few liners. 3-4 in the morning, the rod's gone. One of the rods fished out to that zone where I'd seen them showing, and then it was a really slow take. I remember sliding the waders on and getting down to the rod, and it was just dee, clutch just going slow, lifted up into a heavy fish. Straight away, it's just plodding about, you know, as they do, sort of zigzagging. And to be honest with you, scrambled back up the bank again to try to get that line out of the water as much as I can. Before I knew it, it was locked up on something. I pulled a little bit more and it's just cut me. I was fishing long snag leaders, braided snag leaders, and halfway up the leader it's just cut me like a Stanley knife blade's gone through it. And yeah, that did wound me a bit, that loss. I mean, in hindsight, I'm pretty sure that was probably muttleys. Muttleys never done its autumn bite that year. But it was the first proper one I'd really put a hook in that season. Yeah, I did end up, the fish started spending a little bit of time in sort of the furthest end of the lake, and there's a swim. It's on the out of bounds bank, but right on the end, they call it the end of buoy line. The fish was sort of spending quite a bit of time in that corner. And I managed a couple of captures out of there, I think a small one and a mid-20 common, but I can't actually remember how many fish I'd caught up until that point, but it was 6 or 7 fish and that loss. It wasn't a great return for the amount of time I'd done. It's sort of worth mentioning now as well about that fully. Now I know this fish has a habit for going long periods of time without doing bites, but what sort of fried my brain is I never saw it in the water, and some of the other good anglers on there who I trust their opinion, they hadn't seen it in the water either. I remember just before they spawned, I'd moved swims. I'd found a gathering of fish sort of 3/4 of the way down the fishing bank. Thought I'd found the mother load, set up in the swim. It was pretty obvious the next morning they started spawning. That's why they all were there. Now I saw most of the fish in the lake then. Muttleys and starburst, no fully. Again, sort of latter part of the summer when they started getting down into that corner at the end of buoy line. Most of them were there. I remember seeing, we actually got some drone footage. One of the boys had come down to do a bit of filming with me, and we actually got drone footage of muttleys feeding with, I think it was with, there's another fully in there. I think it's called the patch fully, feeding on the bar with this other fish. Starburst was sort of like swimming about in the edge, on the reeds. Drop scale linear was there. Again, no fully scaled. Like I say, it wasn't the fact that it hadn't been caught. I knew that fish done that, but in my heart it told me, when you find the bulk of those fish, the better fish in the lake, that one should be there as well, but it just wasn't. I carried on that year sort of through the autumn, and did manage one of the better ones sort of in the autumn. Again, a bit of a funny story. My first walk around the lake when I met Liam, there was 2 Liams. There was one Liam was fishing the lake and the other was fishing meadows. Well, Liam always done his bit in muttleys, so I never fished muttleys. Muttleys is a very good swim. It's sort of where the sort of like the vertical bars then meet the horizontal bars. It leaves like a bit of a deep sort of gully running away from you from the fishing bank, and it was I always thought that almost like when if them fish were using them bars or using those gullies, it'd almost be like a bit of a meeting area. All those bars led into that gully. You almost must imagine motorways, and they'd all lead into this one area. It was a very good swim. Well, when one of the Liams finished his time on Reach, the other Liam decided to fish it, and he'd been fishing in muttleys, like the other Liam did. So muttleys was a swim that I'd never fished. I'd always, the lake was quiet enough for us to sort of, not step on each other's toes, and I'd never sort of gone in muttleys. But through that autumn, the fish spent a lot of time in that muttleys swim. I remember seeing him in there numerous times, but Liam was doing his bit, so I sort of left him to it. And I turned up on a Sunday, and Liam wasn't in muttleys. He was up the lake a bit in a swim further along, and I thought almost this is my opportunity. Like, he's almost boycotted his swim, and it's like, I can do a night in there. So went in muttleys, put my rods out reasonably long, where I'd sort of in that sort of deeper gully where I'd seen those fish showing over the course of the previous 2, 3, 4 weeks. And I put the rods out just on dark, just as the boats went in, and it can't have been 2, 3 hours later, I had a bite, and it was starburst again, which was crazy. I'd kept away from that swim all season and not fished it, and it ended up a few hours in there and had starburst, and it was big as well. I think it was the biggest it's ever gone. It was sort of just a touch under 48. A repeat capture, I know, but sort of it, at last it was sort of a proper one in the net, and that was sort of Again, that was sort of mid-end of October, and again that sort of signalled the lake shutting up shop. As I said before, she's a mean girl through the winter, and I don't think she done bites until the following spring. I didn't carry on quite as long that year. I think I called it a day, sort of November, and I was in a bit of a funny situation really. When you fish these hard waters, especially somewhere like Longreach, it's not, those fish don't get caught very often. You've got the constant worry of, the otters. Even though I used to see otters on there, but I never saw a fish with any otter damage. But you just sort of, I'd sort of expressed my concerns to him sort of latter part of that year, and he sort of summed it up really well. He said, it's the devil on your shoulder. It's that little bit of doubt, that little devil on your shoulder, and he's just whispering things in your ear, and it makes you, does make you question. I'd gone on there in the autumn and I'd caught muttleys and starburst. The following full year that I'd done, I'm pretty sure I lost muttleys and I caught starburst. And in reflection, you sort of think, I've almost just done what I'd done the autumn before. There'd been no more captures, no sightings of the fully. But I had the whole winter to sort of think about things, and funnily enough, sort of early part of the following year, I got a phone call that I've been waiting for many years, and got offered a ticket to fish for my dream fish on an extremely demanding water. And with that little devil on my shoulder saying the fully might not be in there, part of me just wanted, to go off into the new water, but the other part of me, to do what I needed to do on the new water, I needed to go there with a clear head and with no regrets. And I could not leave that fully behind. It's just, when I sort of set my heart on something, I need to catch that fish. I'm not one of these anglers who can flit about from water to water. It's almost like I have to be a one-track mind, and I needed to catch that fully, to draw a line under that, then I would be free to go on to the next one. So that's what I decided. I'm going to go back to Longreach, give it the year. Hopefully the fully turns up. I can't say in a stark contrast from the year before. I remember the spring the year before, I was absolutely buzzing for it. I knew I was going to have it. I can't say that I started this season with the same amount of confidence. It was a bit, to begin with, it was a bit more going through the motions, but that didn't take long to change. So I started back March, I believe, and it was an extremely wet, I think it was like the wettest March ever in Cambridgeshire or something. We had a crazy amounts of rain. That the lake was that lake was constantly up. It was real different to the year before. Dominated with cold winds. And I'd done my first couple of trips just dotting around, and I think this was sort of end of sort of March now. I remember turning up on a Sunday. We'd had a load of rain. The ditch was overflowing into Longreach up the top end, and the water, my mate who'd done the night before, like the water had come up like nearly a foot overnight. So I decided to fish the office bank. Probably not where I wanted to be. It had a real cold wind, like northeasterly, hammering into it, but I knew that there was higher ground I could bivvy up on there, and I can also keep a good eye on the whole lake. So that's what I'd done. Nothing much happened really, most of the trip, cold. And then I remember sitting there, my sort of bivvy was looking out. I couldn't look out dead down the lake, I had to keep standing out. But where I was sitting in my bivvy, I could sort of look down the office bank. And I sat there on the final morning, just having a cup of tea. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning. I've just seen a carp nut out. One's just slid out, like that, just golden common. I thought, Jesus Christ. The spring before, I never saw a carp show within casting range. So I thought, this is, you know. So I've cranked a couple of rods in. As I'm sort of tying and balancing more pop-ups now, I've seen another one go over. It was sort of in front of the swim further down the bank, but I flicked a couple of rods out to it and didn't see no more shows. Nothing else happened. I ended up packing up sort of later on that day. But that week I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was the spring before. I'd seen nothing. I hadn't once cast a single at a showing fish. But this year already, in horrendous conditions, with all this floodwater going in the lake, I'd seen 2 go over, and something just seemed different. It's amazing how you can go from being, you know, almost going through the motions, and these couple of little signs, it almost just flipped me on my head. I thought, do you know what, like this, you know, it could happen this spring. Like, things are going to start happening. You know, I only caught 1 fish the previous spring, so, you know, I didn't have to catch many to do better, but it just seemed, something seemed different. In them few short weeks, the lake just had a whole different vibe about it. You know, it went from, you know, is the Fully still in it, to the Fully's coming out this spring. It was, you know, it was almost that in my mind. I knew that it was sort of, I had to get stuck in. And this particular trip, I'd turned up and I'd gone back in that, call it the left-hand doubles. I'll spare you the details, but I had a bad dose of food poisoning. I'd got my rods out and I'd had a really, really bad guts in the morning. But the fish were in front of me and they were showing closer in than where I had the rods. And my guts was killing me. I was in sort of a bad way, but the fish were, you know, in front of me, and like, I knew there was bites on the cards. Well, that day I repositioned my rods sort of closer where the fish were showing, and that night was the night from hell. I was so ill. I was, again, I'll spare you the details, but on the bucket all early hours of the morning, I was in pieces, man. The next morning I had to pack up and get home and try my best. I couldn't do nothing about it. But then all through the early hours of that morning, they were booming out in front of me. It was like the place had just gone off. And then when I was at home at work the rest of that week, hearing, up until that point it'd only been smaller ones caught, but now you know, the drop scale. Lynn, I think someone had just rocked up and had the drop scale within a few hours, like a new member. And then Starburst had came out, and it was, you know, it was just all happening. It was, you know how it goes in spring when the fish just get on it. I was still feeling a bit under the weather, if I'm honest with you, so I didn't go back on the Saturday. I decided to get down on the Sunday morning so I could take my time, get set up. I've walked down the fishing bank early-ish that morning. I've seen one show long out behind it, as an area they used to like, long out behind the ski ramp. One's just sort of slid out of the water. And then talking to the boys who had done the weekend, you know, it's worth mentioning again, the lake was busier again this spring. So I decided to go in Mutley's. I remember the trip well because it was like a roaring northerly right into my face. It was freezing, you know, you still get the cold winds that time of year, and it was freezing. I was all letterboxed up in there. And Mondays were always a reasonably nice day, like boat-wise. The boats would always be out in force at the weekend, and they would always be out Monday evening. There was like a crew that used to come Monday evening. But generally Monday morning, you'd get, you know, a good portion of the morning until sort of latter part of the afternoon, you'd be able to fish. So I think I was the only one on. So the Sunday when I put the rods out, I'd not been able to get them quite out as far as I wanted. You know, it was a real sort of heavy sort of headwind, and I couldn't quite get them out where I wanted them. But they were out there. You know, they're all right. And Monday morning, I'm all sort of letterboxed up in my bivvy, like having a cup of tea, and I'm just scanning across the water. And as I've sort of scanned and looked in front of me, I've just seen this fucking great mirror just out of the water, just side onto me, just slid out. I didn't hear it make a sound, probably because the wind was so strong. It's almost, if you weren't looking that split second, it just slid out the water and slid back in silently. and it was a good fish, like it was a real good fish. The northerly was still right in my face, and I was sort of all letterboxed up, and it was getting around the time when the boats were due to turn up, so I'd had my tackle box on me lap, and I was just starting to tie up some rigs. Bear in mind, I'd never had an afternoon bite on Longreach. The right hand rod has just melted. Like it almost took me by surprise. I had my receiver in my jacket pocket where I'd been sort of walking up and down the bank, and then I remember as I was sort of scrambling down the bank to the rod, you know, it's one of them takes where you can actually hear the clutch over the buzzer. You know, it was melting, and I've lifted up into this fish. Again, a big heavy weight, just slow plodding as they do. And it sort of, as it sort of came in, sort of zigzagging about, it sort of kited down the right hand side. Now Longreach is fairly overgrown, and the margins sort of they deepen off, you know, quite well. And sort of in between the swims, you've got sort of your general sort of fallen trees and bits. It's not really an area where you want the fish going. Sort of this fish had kited in, not hard, but just sort of slowly. I couldn't really gain line on it, and it almost got so my line was sort of down, running sort of parallel with the bank. I've just put the tip under, and I'm just cranking it back, and it, you know, in that situation, you've just got to keep it. As long as it's coming, you're all right. So it's coming. Landing it is still sort of a few yards that side of me, sort of propped up in the water. It's coming. I felt the leader knot clang through the tip ring, so I knew I was safe. So I've lifted the rod up, and with that, there's just big mirror back has just rose up out the water, and I'm straight away for starburst or muttleys, straight away. And as it's rose up, it's just turned, and as the fish has sort of curled round, it's just opened up all its scales down the full length of it, and it's just powered back down. And it was just, I knew from that second that was that fully scaled. I can't describe how much it shocked me. I was convinced it was either going to be muttleys or starburst, and just to show the big armour plates all down the full size of it. It lunged back down, plodded around a little bit more, you know, but you know, by then it was near enough beaten. So I actually had to. The trouble was on there because the water level was a bit up. Normally I'd have my rods slightly further out in the water. So you could actually, if you had a bite on the right hand rod, you could walk around the back of your rods to net the fish from that side. But because of the depth of water, I had my butts actually on the bank. So I sort of had to net the fish over the top of the other two rods, and got the sort of net in position. The next time it come up, it went straight in the net. And yeah, to say it was a surreal experience, to go from a few short weeks before questioning, am I doing the right thing going back to Longreach, to looking down into the net. It couldn't have been anything else other than the fully, but I remember getting my phone out and having a look at someone else, and I'm thinking, but it's got, what else can it be? It's got, and sure enough it was the Longreach Fully, and the one that I wanted most, the one that I joined there for, just a surreal day. My time at St Ives and Englefield, you know, it really made me remember how much I loved that style of fishing. You know, my angling's gone through sort of various stages, you know, as I've got older, and I suppose I've got to take you back a few years to sort of explain that fully. But you know, I remember the first water where I ever really went to catch a certain carp. You know, back in Norfolk, it was a fish called babyface. You know, at the time it was the biggest fish in the county. Not only that, it was a fish that, you know, some of the big names had caught. You know, Terry Earn had caught it and Jim Shelley had caught it, and I remember fishing. I remember fishing on Charity, and I caught babyface.
55, what, 8? Yeah. 55, 10?
Yeah.
Fucking what a fish. Nice one.
That's pucker that is, mate.
You saw that?
Oh, awesome shot.
Yeah, it's pucker, mate.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Happy?
sweet, yeah.
I always think of that fish as a bit of a turning point in my fishing. I'd always done reasonably well everywhere I'd went, but when I fished that lake, I didn't know anyone else on the syndicate. It was a bit further than I'd travelled before. It was sort of going out of my comfort zone, and you know, it's a fish that made me think. You know, I'm for whatever reason, I'm sort of reasonably good at this. It sort of gave me the confidence to go on to other places. You know, and if sort of a few years after that, I sort of come to a situation in my working life. I'd always had full-time employment, and I decided to go self-employed, which obviously gave me flexibility within my angling. I mean, the trouble is, I fished a lot of the better Norfolk, Suffolk waters, you know, for quite a few years, and there was always going to come a time when I wanted to travel further afield, and going self-employed just gave me the flexibility to be able to do that. You know, I had some lovely fishing in, you know, back home. I fished some hard waters, you know, for some very difficult fish. It was really, you know, there's something about targeting a certain carp when that fish consumes all of your thoughts, you know, and then to achieve that, it's a very different thing than just going fishing for what comes along. If I'm honest with you, it's what I enjoy the most. I enjoy that grind, that thought of that one. You know, that is what I enjoy most. And so the time sort of came when I went self-employed, and you know, at the time I didn't think that it would be a long-term situation. It was I thought maybe it would just be a case of doing it for a few years, fishing more, and I sort of decided to fish some of these sort of super waters, if you like. I know the first place I fished after I went self-employed was the Essex Manor, which was a crazy place. You know, there was more 40-pounders in that one lake than all of Norfolk and Suffolk put together. And again, I remember my first trip down there. You know, you were sort of rubbing shoulders, and there was these blokes on here, and they were the people that I'd seen in the magazines and the sponsored anglers, and you know, it was a real sort of, as you do, you're sort of like a little bit apprehensive, but you know, really there was absolutely no need to be. You know, again, with hindsight, I'd fished a lot harder waters back home, and you know, I done really well on the Manor. And then after that, I went to Horton. You know, just a phenomenal stock of big fish. You know, I remember my first few trips on the Church Lake. I had a few incredible hits on the Church, and it was just big un after big un, and it was, you know, it was very enjoyable. You know, don't get me wrong. Again, I was sort of in the mindset of, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to travel for my fishing, so I was just trying to fill my boots. But you know, I suppose it was Horton that sort of made me realise it almost seemed a little bit soulless. You were catching these 40, 50 pounders, and it wasn't like it was a fish that you'd fought all year hard to capture, you know, you were just almost getting it back and thinking, oh, I've got to get them rods back out and catch the next one. You know, it almost became, you know, a bit, I don't know, the whole thing just can become a little bit mechanical, you know. I don't feel like my heart was truly in it. It wasn't, you know, what I loved, and definitely sort of I had a brief stint on Wellington Country Park as well, sort of after I finished on Horton. But I done really well on Welly. I caught some massive fish, you know, my current PB. But I think the Welly ticket came all wrong for me. I accepted the Welly ticket because it's a lake that I'd sort of always wanted to fish. But I'd already reached that stage in my angling where I wanted, you know, that little bit more of the thrill of the chase, you know. And I only done a relatively short time on Welly, and really it was my fishing on the Shallow Pit and Longreach and Englefield that sort of, you know, it really sort of made me realise sort of that is, you know, my true calling as such. That is what I enjoy most.